looked quite a bit like Michael looks right now. And they sat in the front row in Conan's studio. And when I came out, actually before I came out, because when Fish was on, they would cut to them and they would identify them as the Costas heads. And they were like, when is Bob coming on? Get Fish off. We don't care about Conan's mom.
I gotta find that.
Where's Bob going to come on? And then when I came on, everything I said, they cheered and they high-fived and the whole deal, and they were the Costas heads. And that caught on so much that the next 4 or 5 times I was on, the Costas heads appeared. So Michael looks like he could have been one of the Costas heads, although at that time either not born or an infant.
Right.
Oh, yeah, that's a.
So now I've taken up too much of the time. So we'll start the clock right now.
All right. So here's what I'm gonna do, because we are on StreamYard. So I'm gonna share the screen right now, and I'm gonna hope the audio is good.
Okay, I can hear you.
Before you do that, Josh.
Wait, Josh.
Wait. Okay.
So,
all right.
So I have realized if I completely leave the stream, I will end up ending the stream, which is not going to be fun for anybody. So I am going to be in here, but we will get my ugly bearded mug out of the way. But you will see that Sportscaster logo in the corner, which is my profile picture. So we'll do a little bit of in-app branding, as they call it. So without further ado, Mr. Berman, Josh, Mr. Mirsky, Michael, Mr. Brown, Luke, you are here with the one and only Bob Costas. And
all right.
From here, you guys can figure out whether you refer to him as Bob, Mr. Costas, or something in between.
What would you prefer?
Yeah.
How does Your Excellency sound? Bob is good. Bob is good.
All right.
Okay, so Josh, you have the green light, my friend.
All right.
Go ahead and start the Sportscaster stream. I'll get out of the way. Gentlemen, do your thing.
Okay. We are on. I'm waiting on the comments here, making sure the audio is good. Is the audio good? Please.
I can hear you.
Yeah. All right. That's good.
All right, we're good?
I believe. Wait. I think I figured out the problem because it was not good for them. Now I think it's good. Yep, we're good. Okay.
All right, we're good. All right, now joining us, one of the greatest broadcasters of all time, Bob Costas. Bob, thank you so much for doing this. Thanks for joining us.
Michael, thank you, and thank Josh and Luke, and congratulations on winning the contest and helping to raise money for a worthy cause. So the floor is yours. Whatever you want to ask, I hope I'll have some answers.
All right, you currently work for MLB Network as a play-by-play guy. Before you worked for NBC Sports, you were hosting and you did play-by-play for boxing, golf, baseball, NASCAR, basketball, football, hockey, the Olympics. You've done horse racing. You've done talk show hosting, made appearances on HBO Sports, and now have an interview show on MLB Network called Studio 42 with Bob Costas. You've won 28 Emmy Awards. You've hosted 11 Olympic Games. Syracuse University alum, that's a lot. And you're also in the Baseball Hall of Fame and the St. Louis Sports Hall. So I want to know, we know all that. What was the journey like? How did you get there to where you are right now?
Well, going to Syracuse University was a purposeful thing from the standpoint of becoming a broadcaster. In the early 1970s, most universities had journalism departments, but they were almost exclusively print. Syracuse was way ahead of the curve in that they had a communications department that was already pretty well developed, already had professional level facilities for both radio and television, and they took the broadcast part of it seriously. So that, coupled with the fact that I was aware that Marty Glickman, who practically invented how basketball should be called on the radio and was the first voice of the Knicks, and later the legendary voice of the New York Giants on radio, football, and all kinds of other sports around New York, that Marty Glickman and his protege, Marv Albert, had both gone to Syracuse. Since then, you're probably aware that Syracuse is pretty much sportscaster U. Dozens and dozens of very accomplished sportscasters have come out of Syracuse. So starting there, I was able to get experience, hands-on, on-air experience, beginning when I was a freshman. I was just 18 years old. And none of us at that stage are really all that good. But at least you get your feet wet, you get some sense of how it is. And after that, I was lucky enough at age 22 to land a job in St. Louis doing games in the Old American Basketball Association. When I was 24, I did my first network broadcasts. I did football and basketball for CBS. Someone at NBC noticed me, and instead of just freelance work, they hired me full-time when I was 27. And I was perfectly happy doing what I was doing, play-by-play of regional football games and the backup baseball game of the week on NBC. And then, things just have to happen or tend to happen, and you have to be ready to grab the opportunity when it presents itself. Bryant Gumbel, who's a very, very accomplished broadcaster, left his position as the host of almost everything at NBC Sports to become one of the hosts of the Today Show. And at that point, they had no one to move into Bryant's slot. And I had never done much hosting. I'd never read a teleprompter before. Almost everything I'd done was either radio stuff or on the play-by-play side, it was all that, play-by-play, not hosting. But they felt that I could do it. They threw me in kind of without much of an audition. And from there, since I did pretty well with that, that led to a whole lot of other things, including programs outside sports and then eventually hosting the Olympics. And, one thing led to another is kind of the way it often goes.
Yeah, that's really cool.
What do you enjoy more, play-by-play or hosting?
I enjoyed play-by-play of baseball and still enjoy it very much. I loved it when I did play-by-play of the NBA on NBC during the Michael Jordan era in the 90s. And generally speaking, the things I enjoy most are play-by-play of those two sports, especially long-form interviews, and hosting that has some sort of commentary and journalism component to it.
All right. Segue
All right.
that for Luke.
All right. So,
Luke, by the way, I have a question for you.
yes.
Besides the fact that we can discern that you're a Bronco fan, are you in the Federal Witness Protection Program? I appear to be overlit. Josh and Michael are properly lit, and you are in deep shadows.
I am. Here, I'll turn this one on too. Does that help?
Oh, there you go.
All
There
right.
you go.
Much
See,
better.
I have no lights on at all in my house. It's just I'm on the West Coast. It's just whatever
Ah.
natural light,
Yeah.
whatever natural light is coming in. But
Pitch
there you
black
have
here.
it. Where were we?
All right. So back in May and April, we saw one of the greatest sports documentaries of all time, The Last Dance, and we saw you in that as well. Whether it was a talking head interview or it was voiceovers on the highlights that during the game.
Those weren't voiceovers of highlights.
Well, yeah, like
that was the live play-by-play of the
yeah,
game.
yeah.
Okay.
So what was it like to be part of The Last Dance?
Well, they interviewed me at some length several months before the documentary premiered, so I was aware that I was going to be in it to one extent or another. The oddest thing about it for me was hearing all the play-by-play clips. I'd done those games,
Right.
but I hadn't heard any of them in 22 years. And I didn't remember what I'd said in each case. I remembered pretty much what I'd said on Michael Jordan's last shot in Game 6 against Utah. But all the things leading up to that, it was a revelation to me. Oh, I said that, and Doug Collins said that, and Isaiah Thomas said that. So I was kind of reliving it. And it took me back to how gratifying it was to be part of something which even then I realized wasn't just that year's NBA championship. It was one of the epic stories in American sports history. And I knew even then that people would be talking about it well beyond that season and into the next. And they're still talking about it.
Absolutely.
I mean, you were there for, you were covering Michael Jordan's career. You were there for the big games while Michael Jordan was playing. I'm sure that was a thrill because he's now the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
Yes. We knew even then that he was in the discussion of the greatest of all time. Some had already proclaimed him that. It's difficult to compare athletes from one era to the next because the circumstances under which they do the great things they do are different. And in basketball, it's very difficult to compare a guard or forward to a center. I don't know how you compare Michael Jordan to Wilt Chamberlain or to Kareem or someone like that. But certainly no one could rank ahead of Michael Jordan,
Right.
both in his individual talent and in his accomplishments. His teams won 6 NBA titles. He was the MVP in all 6 NBA finals. He won 10 scoring titles. You know, there's a case to be made for LeBron, perhaps on mere physical ability. LeBron's bigger and stronger than Michael.
The argument, really.
He can play 4 positions on the court. Other than center, he doesn't have any limitation. All right, so we grant LeBron all of that. But are LeBron's accomplishments equal to Michael Jordan's accomplishments? No, they're not. So until further notice, in my book, Michael Jordan's the greatest of all time.
I'm with you.
Yeah.
So, Bob, you've covered 7 Super Bowls.
Is that the number?
Yeah, that's the number.
Sounds right, around there.
Yeah. So, for me, probably the best game that you covered out of the 7 was Super Bowl 49 between the Patriots and Seahawks. Malcolm Butler interception.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
What was it like, first of all, covering the Super Bowl? But, I mean, that game in particular was incredible. That game, as other things like the Jordan shot, will live forever in sports history. Like,
Yeah, except my role there is much less integral than that of Al Michaels or Chris Collinsworth. So you handle a 6-hour pregame show. You know that the halftime show on a Super Bowl is just a quick in and out because you're getting out of the way for the big halftime extravaganza of entertainment. And then the postgame show is going to be an extended postgame show. So what you're doing as the host is you're making mental notes, especially throughout the second half, of what the various key moments were, the turning points might have been. And in that case, in the case of that game, things shifted quite a bit. One moment I'm thinking that the Patriots have been yet again denied in the Super Bowl, and the Seahawks have won back-to-back Super Bowls. So I'm imagining Russell Wilson being interviewed and Pete Carroll being interviewed and Marshawn Lynch refusing to be interviewed.
yeah.
I'm imagining all of that. And
I'm
then
this year,
Malcolm
so I get my
Butler-
ring.
Yeah, Malcolm Butler steps in and rewrites the script. But what I had to think about and what I had to do was much less impressive and much less important than what Al Michaels had to do. He's doing the play-by-play in real time, in the moment. And Al is such a master of his craft. If you go back and listen to that call, very few people could have anticipated that play turning out the way it did. Malcolm Butler was not a big-name star, and yet
Drafted rookie.
undrafted rookie. He immediately identified him. You live in fear when you're a play-by-play person that you'll screw up in a big moment, especially in the social media era where it will live in infamy if you mess it up. And Al, I'm not aware of any time when Al has messed it up, and he aced that one like he usually does.
No, Al Michaels definitely not.
All right. You've covered 11 Olympics. You've hosted the Olympics 11 times, which is, a ton. And the world is, once, it's Olympic time, the whole earth, or, the face of the earth is the Olympics. So what is it like having, a bunch of people from all over the world watching you when you host the Olympics?
Well, I don't think about people watching me worldwide, but I do think of tens of millions of people at a time watching me in the United States. And over time, since the Olympics are basically a nearly 3-week mini-series, that's what it is, in prime time. Now, the network that hosts the Olympics has material on in all day parts because, like NBC, has multiple platforms. They've got MSNBC, they've got NBCSN now, the sports network, they've got Telemundo and others. So at various times of the day and night, a lot of stuff is going on. But I've only been on, with the exception of the first Olympics I did in 1988 in Seoul, Korea, when Brian Gumbel was the primetime host and I was the late night host. I've only been on in prime time. So what I'm thinking about is that my role is to provide an overview. I don't have to memorize every platform diver from Peru or every cross-country skier from Norway. I need to be well informed on the storylines that are going to take up most of the time in prime time. I need to know a lot about the history of the Olympics so I can put things in perspective. I need to know a good bit about the host city and the host nation, because that could come into play. The host of the Olympics is a sportscaster, yes, but he's also at times a news broadcaster, also at times a journalist. Also, at times, he's conducting a travel log, because a lot of the viewers aren't interested just in the competition. They're also interested in the host city, the host nation, not just the tourist sites, but some of the historical background. And I looked at that as a good portion of my job. And I didn't have to know as much about each individual venue and each individual event as the experts who are at that venue to call those events had to be. That's the way I saw it. If I was thinking every single moment, X number of millions of people are watching me and probably judging me, then you couldn't do your job. After the first couple that I did, I was comfortable doing it. I knew how to do it. And I knew that it was impossible to do it perfectly in the minds of the entire audience, because people come to an Olympics with so many different expectations.
Right.
A lot of people watch the Olympics avidly who are not really sports fans apart from that. They don't watch that much baseball or football or basketball. In fact, you might be amazed to hear that maybe not often, but at least a few times over the years, I've had people say to me, "What do you do when you're not doing the Olympics?" I think, well, I don't know, the Super Bowl, the NBA Finals, the Kentucky Derby, the World Series, but they only watched the Olympics. So you have to be mindful, especially as the primetime host, and the producers have to be mindful, that a lot of the people watching in prime time aren't watching for granular detail about the pole vault or every aspect of gymnastics. And if they are, they get that from the people at the venue.
Right.
They're looking for big picture stories and personal stories and backdrop type stuff. And it was our job to deliver that to them.
Yeah, and aside from the big Olympic sports like soccer, or like the big sports, soccer, basketball, hockey, the big ones in the Olympics, what's the most like entertaining to cover outside of those?
It's like surprisingly entertaining sports.
Right. Yeah. Like a surprisingly.
Well, I mean, the most obvious one is curling.
I knew it.
In the Winter Olympics, which
There you
is just, I mean, it's when and I've said a few irreverent things on the air and most people appreciate it, but like I said, you can't please everybody because they come to it with different perspectives, and some people think the Olympics should be like church, that should all be solemn and serious and never any irreverence, and if that's the case,
No
then
fun
they have the
allowed.
wrong guy hosting it all those times. But I remember saying, you know what's great about curling? You're watching curling, and you realize that if they win, the team that wins, they take home gold medals that are exactly the same as Michael Phelps' gold medals. They're exactly the same as Bonnie Blair's gold medals. They're exactly the same as the gold medals that Jesse Owens won in 1936. They'll be able to say 50 years from now, tell their grandma, yep, that's my Olympic gold medal. And they did it in a sport that you could actually be drinking a beer and eating a hamburger while you're doing it. Now, the equivalent of curling, and it probably involves more athleticism. Curling involves skill, by the way, but
Yes.
so does billiards.
Right.
Billiards involves skill, but you could be quite a bit out of shape and a non-athlete and be good at billiards. So curling involves skill. I don't know how much athleticism it involves. Race walking, which is a niche sport in America, is actually a big deal sport in parts of the world, especially Eastern Europe. But to an American viewer looking at it, it's just kind of funny. They're kind of waddling along and back on their heels and going as fast as they can, but without ever really breaking into a jog. And so I said at one Olympics, might have been early in '92 in Barcelona, having a contest, having a race to see who can walk the fastest is like having a contest to see who can whisper the loudest. Eventually, why don't you just speak
I'd win
up?
that, by the way.
Eventually, why don't you just start running? And most people thought that was funny, but the small number of people who are really into race walking in the United States did not take kindly to it, but that's an occupational hazard when you sit in that seat.
As a naturally loud person, I think I'd actually do pretty well at that whisper sport.
yeah.
I think I would be pretty good at that.
All right, so we found an article from a long time ago. They were considering you for the MLB Commissioner job, who is now taken by Rob Manfred. Is it true that you were a potential candidate for that position?
No, there was a time when it was frequently mentioned, never by me, and whenever it was mentioned, I shot it down. I said, you know, I appreciate it, but I don't really think of myself as qualified by background or by temperament to be the commissioner of baseball. At that time, I guess I still am, somewhat outspoken and occasionally opinionated about baseball, and what I said resonated with a lot of people. And so my name was tossed around, and sometimes it still is tossed around as a possible commissioner of baseball, but I never considered it to be a possibility, and I never really thought that I was qualified for it.
If you were to have the MLB commissioner job, what in today's game would you change? What would you try to make better?
Well, leaving aside the very complicated and damaging issue of the relationship between the owners and the commissioner and the Players Association, and they're going to have to come to grips with it again very shortly. They had a bitter dispute this summer, which the nation did not appreciate in the midst of all the other troubles that are going on. The nation did not appreciate that public squabbling, but the next headbutting is just around the corner. And I don't envy Rob Manfred that negotiation. But in terms of the game itself, pace of play is the biggest issue. I favor a 20-second pitch clock with nobody on base to keep things moving along. I favor umpires urging hitters, and if they ignore those urgings, calling a strike or whatever is necessary to keep them from stepping out of the box after every pitch. You know, during this period of time when we haven't had present-day baseball, we've shown all-time games that we pulled out of the archives. And one of the things that struck me about those games is that sometimes you can see as many as 3 pitches thrown within 20 seconds. There's no rule making it happen. That was just the pace of the game. Catcher returned the ball to the pitcher. The batter hadn't swung at it. He took ball 1. He didn't leave the batter's box. He looked at it, he nodded, he got his sign, and here came the next one. The pace of play, it isn't so much how long the game goes. Because if you've got a game that's 10-8 and there's lots of excitement, you don't care if that game's 3 hours and 15 minutes. But if the game is 3-1 and there's all kinds of pitching changes and not much happens, and that game takes 3 hours and 15 minutes, you don't appreciate it. So pace of play is really an important issue. And at the heart of it, or at least part of it, is that the modern analytics revolution in baseball may work for giving teams a winning edge, but it works against what makes baseball entertaining. The all or nothing aspect of it. Home run or nothing. Front offices don't mind if you get 5 hits in a game. If 3 of them are homers, they don't mind. They don't mind all the strikeouts. But the ball is in play less often. So you get fewer spectacular defensive plays, fewer doubles being stretched into triples, or guys trying to go from first to third or score from first on a double. And the shifts may make sense competitively, but they take a lot of great baseball plays away. And they also take base hits away, which means there are fewer base runners. And the analytics say that, except in certain situations, the stolen base is not a high percentage play. But the stolen base has always been a very exciting play in baseball, with players in motion and throws and tags and baseball plays. There are too many games now that don't have enough baseball plays in them. Baseball is supposed to have a pleasing leisurely pace. It's not supposed to have a slow as molasses meandering pace. Right. And that's the biggest issue that baseball has to confront. It would be helpful if the players recognize that they have a stake in that too. Right. That the more appealing the game is, the better the business of baseball will do. And by extension, the better everybody involved, including the players, will do financially.
Right, yeah, and I assume the fans would like that more. Because, you know, I know some people that don't watch baseball because they don't like the pace of the game, because it's too slow for them.
Right.
You know? So
that's
it's
my biggest issue.
Right, yeah.
I'm sorry, I know what you said, Josh.
Not saying that's my biggest issue with it is the pace of play. Exactly what you just said is exactly, as someone who's just not a huge baseball fan, if they did exactly what you just said, personally, I would find baseball a lot more entertaining because I'm not waiting for every pitch.
Exactly.
Well, and the other thing is this. You don't invest, think of a movie. You don't invest, if a movie lasts 2 hours and 45 minutes, but you can only stay up for 2 hours, you're not going to say, well, at least I saw most of it. If you can't see the end of it, you're not going to invest all the time leading up to it. So if you're checking your watch and we're 2 hours in and we're only in the 5th inning and it's a weeknight and it's a school night under normal circumstances, and again, under normal circumstances, people have to go to work. And very often this is true of postseason games, because the most important games, the postseason games, tend to be even longer than the average regular season game. And you have a lot of people saying to themselves, gee, I'd love to invest my time in this, but I can't stay up until past midnight. So it isn't that I'm going to bail on it at 11. I'm going to bail on it right now because I know I can't invest enough of my time to see it through to the end.
Yeah.
So over your career, you've done many things. You've called many incredible moments, from Kobe's alley-oop to Shaq in the Western Conference Finals to Jordan's final shot, Derek Jeter's walk-off single against my Baltimore Orioles.
Mm-hmm.
In his final game.
A very interesting story that we found about Kirby Puckett and your son. And, of course, Pink Eye in the Olympics. So of all of those things or ones we didn't mention, what would be one story that's just really has stood out on your career?
Well, I think that clearly my greatest achievement was managing to soldier through the Olympics with pink eye. And people will sometimes say, you know, I guess they mean well, they're just looking for a conversational icebreaker. I'll be in an airport or something and someone starts to come, hey, Bob, how are you, blah, blah. And then the next thing is, you remember that time you had pink eye at the Olympics? And I'm like, no, what are you talking about? I don't recall that. Refresh my memory. Why would I remember having some kind of an affliction that couldn't be hidden, like a broken leg could be hidden under a table, or if you just felt lousy, you could just show up at work and no one would know? Why would I remember that all of America was talking about my gross eye? And it was only a few years ago. Why would I remember that? No, I have no idea. Remind me again, what went on there?
Right.
So, you know, that's one thing. I was in the Red Sox dugout, clubhouse rather. I was in the dugout before, but then I wound up in their clubhouse in 1986 when their lead in the World Series slipped away at Shea Stadium, and the curse was prolonged from 1986 until they finally broke it in 2004 when the ball went through Buckner's legs and everything else. And I was in the clubhouse thinking I was going to interview a victorious Red Sox team. And then when that all unraveled, we skedaddled out the back door, and there was no sign of us when the Red Sox came trudging down the tunnel and into the visitors' clubhouse at Shea Stadium. I was also in the corner of the Dodger dugout 2 years later when Kirk Gibson hit one of the most dramatic home runs in baseball history in Game 1 of the World Series. Great calls by Vin Scully on television and Jack Buck on the radio, but it was my job to do the postgame show. And I jumped out on the field and interviewed Kirk Gibson in the immediate aftermath. When Muhammad Ali lit the torch at the opening ceremony in Atlanta in 1996, that was a goosebump-raising moment that people still talk about with great reverence. And the Michael Jordan shot, I realized in that moment that it wasn't just an exciting conclusion to an NBA Finals. Every NBA Finals is a big story in that moment or in that piece of time. But I knew that this was something bigger than that. I knew that Michael Jordan would be not only on the cover of Sports Illustrated, but this would be a big story on the front pages of newspapers, not just the sports section. And it would be something that transcended mere sports fans. That's still the highest rated game in NBA history. And Michael Jordan, with all due respect to others, Michael Jordan just occupies a different place in pop culture than others do. So I knew in that moment that it wasn't enough just to say, here's the score and here's the leading scorers and all the nuts and bolts of the game, that I had to put it into some sort of larger context. And I did the best I could in that moment. And you referenced The Last Dance when we started this. Watching The Last Dance, it was gratifying that what I said in that moment still holds up pretty well. Maybe it holds up even better than it did then, 22 years down the road, because I was aware on some level that this was not just a story for that year, that it was a story, in sports terms, it was a story for the ages.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, those are all great plays, sports, defining moments in history for the world of sports. So we thank you so much, by the way, for doing this. We really appreciate it, and it's been really fun. So great insights. But the way we like to wrap up our interviews, we ask one final question. If you have one piece of advice for aspiring sports broadcasters, which Josh, Luke, and I are, what would that be?
Apart from wearing a white shirt and tie at all times and looking like a latter-day member of the Costas heads, which is a very good start, I would say get as well-rounded an education as you can. Don't just confine yourself narrowly to sports. The more well-informed you are, the broader your frame of reference is, the better broadcaster you will be, and the more interesting you will be to listen to. Plus, you never know. The road takes lots of twists and turns. You may decide you want to do something else, or you may want to be involved in broadcasting, but behind the scenes as a producer or as a director or something like that. So get a broad-based liberal arts education and get as much hands-on broadcasting experience as you can. Don't be too hard on yourself. You're not going to be fantastic. Your voice is not going to sound when you're your age or a few years older when you're in college. It's not going to sound the way you hope it will sound eventually. You're not going to have all of the craftsmanship of it down. Be critical, yes. Listen to it with a critical ear. Maybe you'll have a teacher or an older person who has some broadcasting experience who will review it with you and offer some constructive criticism. So you want to do that, but don't be too hard on yourself. If you're going to listen to your tapes in the first year or two that you're doing this and say, why don't I sound like Jim Nance? Why aren't I as good as Mike Tirico? Well, you're going to destroy your confidence right off the bat. Cut yourself a little more slack than that. And then when the time comes to actually try and land your first jobs, send out as many tapes, or now it might be Vimeo links, as you can. Send out 100 of them and just play the law of averages. Maybe 2 or 3 will get back to you. And don't take it personally when you either don't hear back or you get some sort of polite form letter or email that says, we're not interested, because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of other people who have the same idea. So don't take that as personal rejection. Don't let it dent your confidence. Throw everything against the wall that you possibly can. Send out as many applications as you possibly can, and maybe a handful of them will return with a positive reaction. And then build your resume. Don't confine yourself just to sports broadcasting. If you've got a situation where they want you to do high school basketball at some small radio station, but then on the weekends they also want you to read the news reports, do it. Do anything that gets you on the air, that helps to build your resume and build your background as a broadcaster, and then you'll move step by step.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, learning.
You're welcome, Luke.
This.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Josh.
Absolutely.
It's an honor having you on the next. We appreciate
Bye, guys. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good night. See ya.
See ya, Bob. All right. Okay. So again, don't leave just yet. We're going to take a couple-minute break, but
Yeah, so we'll be back in like 5 minutes. Just stay here. We will be right back. So we will have a normal show today on the next, but it will be in a couple minutes. So just stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. Same
commercial break without the
normal
commercials.
show. Yeah, you'll see the next logo.
Yeah.
There's your commercial. All right.
All right, yeah.
All right. So we'll be right back. Don't go.